I always feel like there's a bullseye on my chest when I'm kind of standing here like this. Right. I look like a bullseye?
Sort of behind you.
Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to a conversation with Curtis Runnell, Philhellene scholar, bibliophile, and benefactor of the Gennadius Library, the director of the Gennadius Library, Maria Iorgopoulou, and our own member of the Board of Trustees, alum, raconteur, and executive director of the American School of Classical Studies, George Orphanakos. They will be discussing, long title, The Arc of Greek Culture and the Endless Pursuit to Expand the Collection. We're excited to have you all here. We truly are. It's wonderful having you here. I was honored to be invited to join the overseers of the Gennadius recently, and I believe that there exist really many, many opportunities such as this, where we can host and learn from the important mission of the Gennadius. So welcome, and we look forward to listening to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President Cantonis. It's an honor to be here with you today. We want to welcome those of you who have joined us here and those who are watching us actually around the world online tonight. Before I begin, we want to express our love and respect for His Eminence Archbishop Apidophoros. We met with him as the Gennadios overseers in the spring of last year, and we promised him that we would want to do something in collaboration with Maliotis. That was kind of easy because, as George Cantonis just said, he's a member of our Board of Overseers. Dr. Catherine Yatrakis, who's also a member of the Board of Trustees, is also on the Board of Overseers here. And I'm honored as the Executive Director to be on the trustees of the school. So we already have these wonderful collaborations, and it's just a joy to be together. So it's only natural that tonight we come together, and I get to be part of and to share with you some amazing and remarkable people that are part of the Gennadius Library. But in order for us to talk about the Gennadius Library, you really have to put it in context of what is called the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. You really have to understand where it fits in and what the school. Now, I could sit here and talk to you for 20 minutes about that to explain it. We've left some books on your chairs. But it's much easier to just follow along this brief little short film that we put together for you to get a sense at what I call America's gift to Greece.
If you're interested in mankind, if you're interested in society and how it should function, then you would do well to study the past.
There are certain moments in history where the human spirit just kind of bubbles up and goes.
Whether we're talking about democracy, art, philosophy, it doesn't really matter what the subject is. It begins in Greece.
The school acts as a gateway to not just a different place, but sometimes a different time.
We bring Greece's past to life to really help shape the world's tomorrow. Preserving, protecting, promoting all aspects of Hellenism from ancient times till today. And we've been doing it for 135 years.
There were educated businessmen, lawyers, financiers who truly believed that the study of the Greek past was of a great good for the general public and that it needed to be advanced. We exist by virtue of the philanthropic efforts of individuals like them. We had pioneer women archaeologists leading research teams in Greece. We are international, multicultural, and intercontinental in terms of the networks of collaborations that are carried out.
We're a consortium of almost 200 leading academic institutions in the United States, all of whom support the school.
We draw from that membership, whether in Texas or Hawaii or Massachusetts or Florida, to bring people here.
In a place that has, 3 world-class libraries within 100 meters. When you're in Athens, it feels like the center of the universe.
I would rather do this here at Athens than anywhere else because the major monuments are here and it's very inspiring.
You feel what a contemporary Greek would have felt standing on the Acropolis with the Parthenon right next to you.
What you're doing is creating the next generation. They're all going to be high school teachers. They're going to be professors. They're going to be scholars, and they are the ones who are going to pass on our understanding of antiquity. We have the pieces that were necessary for the working of the democracy, and those are the people of Athens speaking to you directly over thousands of years.
We have about 1.5 million items digitized.
All of that information can really be disseminated to new audiences, to the global classroom.
The American School gives you a place where you can kind of explore your own passions in a way. You have people who are so passionate about the material, they create tools to study it. When you see what can be done at a single site, then you realize, well, why can't we do this across all of Greece and have all of Greece accessible in that way?
There's hardly a part of Greece that some American school project is not operated in.
We've got 300,000 catalogued objects to educate our students, but also for research so that we can come up with better interpretations. We're also developing ways to present this all to the public. So we're creating a management plan to create an archaeological and ecological park, educational programs for children in the States, which we translate into Greek so that students in Greece can also use those same materials.
The collection is about the history of Greek genius through the ages. It is very important to find ways in which to attract people, to make them understand that there is value in the old books and secrets that are hidden in there.
Our mission is essentially a rescue mission. We're creating time capsules for future generations.
It is important to be able to share this through exhibitions, scholarly presentations.
We carry out many synergasias, collaborative projects with archaeologists in the different inspectorates of the Ministry of Culture. We conduct research together and publish together.
We're at a moment of revolutionary change in archaeological science.
Using sophisticated techniques, we dig deep into the past.
We can now tell not only what a person had in his last meal, but where he lived.
I guess I've always been pretty interested in different things, but the school gives you the opportunity to really explore all of those things.
You come over as an American and you leave feeling much more like a Greek. You really do get a second home. Το δεύτερο σπίτι.
Το δεύτερο σπίτι, I love that line. So that sort of gives you a sense. And all, is this on? This is fine? Have any of you ever had house guests? Okay, so I have a little theory on something. If you're a house guest and you go to someone's house and you stay there, for a day, you're a guest. If you stay there for the weekend, I think you got to start putting some dishes in the dishwasher. If you stay there for a week or so or 2 weeks, I think it's appropriate to buy some groceries. We could agree on that. If you stay there for a month, all right, maybe you've overstayed a little bit. If you stay there longer than that, you better start offering to pay some rent. But if you're there for 141 years now, like the American School of Classical Studies Athens is in Greece, there's a time when you stop becoming American and you're actually more Greek. And that's what I think that I've encountered. I joined the school in 2015, and I had never heard about the place before. And when I came here, I found the most remarkable people, and I am honored to share just 2 of them tonight, 2 of them that are the heart of the American school. So we're going to ask them to join here. We're going to have a little dialogue, and I'm going to ask you to please have some questions. One was born in Greece, and the other one chose to be Greek. Okay, you decide which is more honorable. So to start, we're going to ask Dr. Maria Iorgopoulou, the director of the Gennadius Library, to please join us. I'm honored that she's here with us. She got her PhD from UCLA, a professor at Yale, and started the Hellenic Center there, and has been 18 years the director at the Gennadius Library. Please give her a round of applause. And we also have what I like to think, without question, the most interesting man in the world to me, to sit down and have dinner, lunch with it, is a dear friend now, Curtis Runnels. Curtis Runnels, a professor at BU, a professor of archaeology, anthropology, and classical studies. He is a member of our board of overseers, like I said, and he actually received the prestigious Gennadius Prize in 2021. We're going to find out much more about him, so I didn't want to do larger introductions, but please welcome Curtis tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to toss out some questions, and you're mic'd up, and actually we're going to have time for questions and answers, and hopefully you can do that. So, Curtis, I'll start with you. Where did you grow up, and why Greece?
No, that is it's an interesting question. I was born and raised in Kansas, Lawrence, Kansas, and frankly, until I went to college at the University of Kansas, I didn't know anything about Greece. I remember a Greek friend of mine, much later, a Greek friend of mine was living in the United States, and he was traveling in Kentucky. And he was getting gas, and the guy selling gas said, he said, from your accent, I don't think you're from around here. And he said, no, he said, I'm from Greece. And the guy said, Greece, isn't that an island over by Sicily? And I remember that story because probably I would have been in that boat. And of course, when I got to college, I took ancient history, both history of Rome and Greece, but I was more interested in Rome, to tell you the truth. And my life in Greece began by an accident. I wanted to do, my actual specialty in professional life is I'm a prehistoric archaeologist. I specialize in Paleolithic archaeology, the archaeology of the Old Stone Age. And when I was a graduating senior, I wanted to go on a dig somewhere in the world where there was Paleolithic archaeology. So of course I thought of Kenya. So I met Richard Leakey and I asked them if they were taking any. No, they were only taking graduate students from University of Iowa at the time. No. So France, well, that sounded like a good place. And so one of my advisors was from France, was a prehistoric archaeologist, said they don't take any American students. That's not going to work. I had an advisor in the classical studies department where I was studying Roman archaeology. And she said, you want to do Paleolithic archaeology? She said, well, there's this, it's funny, she said, but in Greece, there is an ongoing excavation of a Paleolithic archaeological site called Frankthi Cave. Of course, I'd never heard of any of this, and it seemed like, why Greece? Anyway, to make now a long story very short, I eventually applied to go on that project, and I went. The only thing I knew is that advisor gave me a Greek phrase book and said, start reading. And when I got off the boat in Corfu, by that point, I was getting interested. And by the time I got to the excavation, I was in love with the place. And I never left.
Well, terrific. We're happy to have you. Maria, last week, the Gennadius, which we have several films, by the way, that are part of this collection. We're not going to show them all tonight, but we'll only show one more. But Maria, last week we celebrated the 100th anniversary of Ioannis Gennadius' gift to the American school. So, because we can't go into that film and see everything about it, could you just tell us, please, a little bit more about Ioannis Gennadius, his person, his wife, and his collection?
Yes, so Ioannis Gennadius was born in Athens in 1844. Unfortunately, he lost his father, who must have been an amazing person. He was a teacher, he was an erudite, and although he did not fight in the Greek War of Independence, he was very much a person who was involved and inspired people. So Ioannis Gennadius lost his father when he was 10. His dad died from the plague. And in his 20s, he went to London. He started working for a firm, a Greek firm. Eventually, he joined the diplomatic service, the Greek diplomatic service, and he became ambassador. And I'm convinced that when he arrived in England, he was very surprised by the fact that the British loved and knew a lot of things about ancient Greece, but they didn't care very much about modern Greece. And for him, modern Greece was the project of the time. So one of the ways in which he tried to address this was to put together a collection of books and manuscripts and works of art that actually showed the continuity of the Greek spirit. The fact that Greece did not end with antiquity, but evolved and changed. He ended up putting together a collection that is actually focused on the history of Greece and Hellenism, of about 25,000 books, titles. And in 1922, he decided to offer his collection, to donate his collection to the American School of Classical Studies. Because he appreciated what American academia was, he appreciated what America had done for the world and what the American school had done already in Greece. So this is the story in brief. What is important, I think, to me at least, is that the American school decided at the time not to create a rare book library that would just be a museum for books, but to change the focus of the American school and to make it a school that actually did not end with antiquity, but continued to address and to study the Greek world after the end of antiquity. So the collection now has more than 140,000 books.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, I find it fascinating when I'm in there. And by the way, we have with us tonight Father Bartholomew Mercado, who studied in the Gennadius, right? And Jesula, Presbítera Jesula Curcunti, who visited us this summer, which was very nice. So when you walk in for the first time, I think you can appreciate, you have no idea the magnitude of what's there. But Gennadius himself, in terms of a collector, when you talk to me about it, wasn't a very rich man in sense. And talk just a moment, because we're going to get into that a little. You're going to see the connection in a moment. But talk about, a couple of the items he purchased, the value of what we're talking about here. There's something special about this man.
Indeed. Well, Gennadius was like every collector. I mean, he was very passionate. And books were his children. He didn't have children. So he really knew what he wanted. He married relatively late in life, Florence Lang, a Scottish lady who was a widow, and she became infatuated by his project, and in fact she helped him with her money to purchase certain things that he really wanted to get. And one of these things, it's something that we showed to very few people, and some of you have seen it, is the most expensive book that Gennadius ever bought, which is the first printed edition of Homer, of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And this was a book that he bought at the beginning of early 1914, before the outbreak of the First World War, and for which he paid £425, which was apparently the price of a house in London. So he was, very interested and very interesting in this way. But other things that we have at the library are invaluable now because they are costume books and drawings and works of art for which he didn't have to pay that much. So I think that's the beauty of a collector, and I think we're going to hear more about it.
No, absolutely. I think it's a fascinating story. As each time I go to the school, I sit with Maria, and you hear these elements. I mean, one time I think he was in need of money and had to sell some of his collection.
That's most
right?
of it.
Right?
That's true. In 1895, he was dismissed from his post at the embassy, and he couldn't really make ends meet. And he decided to sell his books to Sotheby's. And we have, in fact, catalogs where he jotted down how much money he got for the books. And by the third day, I think he realized that people were not bidding high enough. So he tried to buy back some of the books, and it's very sad, and we see this in the catalogs, that for the books that he couldn't get back, how really sorry and devastated he was.
And one of the beautiful things about the people I'm able to work with is that they honor these people like Gennadius, but in their own right, they make their own sort of their own history. I really feel that. So there was a guy, Francis Walton. I don't know, did you ever know Francis Walton?
Not personally.
Not personally, but he made it his, as I understand it, right? He made it his life's thing to go find those books and to put the collection back together. And I think it's just like, going after, lost children, like you
yes.
said,
Well,
and
that was in the 60s, and he created a group of friends in the United States to actually make sure that there would be enough money to buy certain books. And one of these books is a very precious botanical 10-volume set about the flora of Greece, which Gennadius couldn't buy, and now we have it thanks to Frank Walton and the Friends of the Library.
So we're going to get into this now a little bit more, because that's the crux of the situation. You can hear the original gift that starts the collection, and now you hear how it's developed over time and a little bit, and loss and gain. But Curtis, for yourself, so we can have a sort of a background for this. You're an archaeologist, so what's your first encounter with the Gennadius Library, and what did you find so fascinating about it? What drew you towards it?
Well, there were sort of two parts to that question and two answers. So the first time I laid eyes on the Gennadius was my first visit to the school, because the same person who had said, go dig in Greece, so I did. And she said, well, you should also go visit the American School of Classical Studies. Like, it was the first time I'd heard of it. Okay. So she told me the address, and on some hot day I went up there, because one thing she had added as an inducement, I'm 20 years old, she said, is they have a cold water fountain. Well, in July, I needed that cold water fountain, and I did. I went up, and I went in, and I had the cold water, and I visited and did the usual thing that the first visit would include. And then I'm leaving, and I get to the, where the cars go out to the garden, and I see the Gennadius. That's the first time I saw it. It's a building, and you see the building in the film. It's a stunning building. It's absolutely makes you stop in your tracks. And I just remember there was a gatekeeper, and I said, "What's that?" Right? I thought it was a hospital or, maybe some important, college building. And he said, well, that's the Gennadius Library. And I remember thinking, I've got to find out what that's about someday. And it went away. It's time to go, and I couldn't do that. And then I came to Greece as a Fulbright fellow, and I'm staying at the American school. And now, of course, I can go into the Gennadius. And then I discovered the same thing that Gennadius had, is even in those days, we're talking about the 1970s, a lot of the other students at the school, this is not the same today, but at that time, quite a lot of them had really very little interest in modern Greece. In fact, one of the stories they told was about one of the students who flew into the airport, the old airport in Lenikon. She got a taxi, she's halfway through Athens, and she said, turn around and take me back. Right, I don't know what she was hoping for, right? And she went and flew home. And
the history of the American school in the chapter, they were fighting to get there, and then they turn around and they say, well, I don't know what we're doing here. Yeah. Something like that, paraphrasing.
Well, in any case, this changed primarily through one of the people who was at the school at the time, Colin Edmondson. Do you remember Colin Edmondson? Was okay. And he was totally different. He said, nope, modern Greece is a wonderful, vibrant, terribly interesting place. And he made sure that all of the student tours, all of the school things were engaged. They went to museums. He had, I can remember going at sunset to the walls of Heraclio in Crete, and he read us from Kazantzakis' novel, Report to Greco, passages, and we went to see dances and music. I mean, he really involved us. And at that point, you know, then I started to focus on the Gennadius again, because I said, that's where all the literature is about this part of Greece. And so I found my way to the reading room, and I began my association in the early 1970s with the library.
And you actually paved a beautiful entry for a great point. You know, the school is the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. But it's very important for us to realize, if you're not hearing it already, that it's not just classical studies, right? So it's from prehistoric times to the present day. Right. And in the film, if you had seen it, I encourage you to watch it. With Marie, I think you talk about, you say it's actually with the gift of Gennadius, it ushered in this completed thing. And I'm going to jump to another question I had, because it goes to this. And hello, welcome. So I've met some people, I'm going to jump to this for a moment. I've met some people that talk about Greece's contribution to the world. And sometimes they'll say in a way that, you know, the glory of Athens ends with the building of the Acropolis, right? But you're a Byzantinist, and I'm sure you probably don't agree with that. So tell us, what are some things that people should pay attention to in the post-classical world? Why modern Greece and its post-classical world, why it matters?
Well, I think, well, this is obviously a very interesting question, and a question that I think, unfortunately, is very much in our mind as educators lately, right? Why the classics and their importance and all that. I think there is, I mean, democracy, philosophy, all of these things are extremely important. But if we didn't have Alexander the Great, who comes much later than the Acropolis, if we didn't have Byzantium, I mean, two big empires where the language was Greek, I don't think there would have been a lot left from ancient Greece. So this is extremely important. I mean, the fact that the texts survived, the thoughts and all of the great accomplishments of the ancient world became and remained relevant one way or another, right? I mean, the Byzantines learned at school, learned Greek reading the Psalter on the one hand and Homer on the other. So there are these two parallel traditions that, in fact, I think are the most important sort of testament of why the medieval period is important. And of course, you know, you come into the modern world, there is, you know, as Curtis said, in order to appreciate and to have a more palpable way of understanding what Greece is and even what ancient Greece was, is by actually living in the same lands and dancing and singing and drinking, all of these things that the ancient Greeks were also doing, obviously, right? Symposia and all of that. So I think, obviously, for me, I was born in Athens, so it's, you know, I guess I didn't have a choice. But I came to this country
But it seems natural to you that everybody wants to come to your home.
Exactly. But, you know, I lived in the US for 20 years, and I chose to go back and because of the Gennadius, actually, because of this wonderful job. So I think, I also think truly that in order to appreciate the classics, and also for all of us, I think in order to make the young generation understand the importance of the classics, we really need to see and make them see that this is not a dead culture.
Right. Well, I think the Gennadius Library, from what I'm seeing, is shining a light on the post-classical world. But how has it changed over the years?
Well,
I mean,
the
most
library,
recently,
you know,
'cause there's been a lot of movement, I know. But
Obviously,
I want you to share some of that.
yes. And I mean, other than the fact that it's growing constantly and we have more books and donations and so on and so forth, from 2004, 2005, with the addition of Kotzen Hall, which is an amazing auditorium that we have, and then in 2018, with the addition of a gallery space, a museum, we have the Makrianis wing. Yes, we have the possibility to actually mount public programs, to have lectures, to have symposia, to have exhibitions. And along with that, of course, if you want to have more people come in, you have to change. You're no longer a school. You're no longer just talking to your students, but you talk to the world. And of course, the internet is, you know, I mean, the World Wide Web is the most, the greatest sort of support that we have. So you can digitize and show this to the world. Our exhibitions, now we try to have them digital as much as we can. For all of us, the pandemic also showed us a few other things. But, you know, social media, which is not of my generation, but, you know, one needs to actually stay active and understand and listen and sort of be part of the world and the changes of the world. So I think we've done a lot, and we're very proud that we have more and more people who come in. We've also had exhibitions of contemporary art. I believe that people also, the shocking factor is also important. I don't mean, I mean, there always needs to be a balance, obviously, between our mission and our public programs. But I think it's very important to have new people come in, and we want to share what we do with the world.
And it's also free lectures, exhibitions, all of those things, the Curtis Music Institute. And maybe say a couple words about the Potamianos lecture series, which is new, which is taking it beyond the borders of Swedias now to a new world. And that's
in fact, this is one of the, I mean, this also comes back to the previous question. We have, thanks to Fokion Potamianos, we have a lecture series that started last year, and it is about the impact of Greek culture and Greek thought to the world. And we have a series of lectures, one in Athens and two in the US, one in DC and one in New York, by people who actually, we ask them, these are important academics, and we ask them to think about what Greek culture has to offer and how it impacts our lives.
And one of the ways you'd measure that, which is pretty remarkable, because you know, not only is it the online audience, what I found was both in Athens, in Georgetown, and at St. Bartholomew's Cathedral, they were sold-out crowds. It was remarkable. It's the why us, why now, why is it relevant? And you can see that there's tremendous interest, and it's an exciting time. So we're going to pause for a moment now. This is our commercial break, in a sense. And we're going to now delve into the art of book collecting, the art of the personality. And to do that, we're going to take a quick moment. I'd like to draw your attention to the screen. This is one of the award-winning films that we've produced at the American School. It actually talks about Curtis Runnels. It shows him a little bit, actually in our native Boston. And then we're going to go and we're going to have some questions and answers. So maybe actually we could sit down and watch it together. We can watch it, yeah. And let's enjoy it together. We'll come back in a second.
I've always liked books. They're beautiful things. The feel, the look, the smell, the touch. But what made me a collector of rare books was I was a graduate student at Indiana University, and a fellow graduate student was house sitting for a faculty member who was on leave. And I went in, and there on a shelf were books of the same kind I was looking at in the rare book library. And then it hit me. One could buy them just like any other book. That was what got me started. And then I started hunting for a favorite one. I found it, and I was hooked. Hello, how are you? Good to see you. Yeah, this is the new acquisition shelves. I always like to look here because I never know what I'm going to discover. I found books from the 17th century, the 18th century, 19th century. Just don't know what you'll find here. I don't think I want to read this one, Treatise on Epidemic Cholera. And then I see, there's something nice. Some of the best artists designed these things, and collectors sometimes look for books that are designed by particular designers. And I've done the same thing. I've bought the book just because, like this, it's just so pretty. You know, who would not want a book like that? It's like looking for gold nuggets. You know, the gold rush where you're digging, and then suddenly something glitters, and you go, a bit of gold. I went to a book fair, and I was talking to a bookseller. And down in a glass case, he had a Greek manuscript. And you just don't see Greek manuscripts. I looked at it, I really wanted it, my heart's beating loudly. Please let me be able to afford this book. He named a price, I paid it. And then he said something about the others in a box. And I didn't catch it at first. I was so excited with the book that I actually left the book fair and I went home. And then later that night I thought, box? What box? Well, the box ended up in my house, and as I reached in and started pulling things out, I began to find beautiful medieval Greek manuscripts. Somewhere around 1525, 1540, something like that, perhaps earlier. And it's just the sort of thing that is intended for the Gennadius library because it needs research. You can see there's even manuscript writing here in these end papers. Do you see that? With dates and other information. You really have to be a specialist in these things. And, you know, a book collector loves the book, but doesn't always necessarily understand the book. This is a great rarity. An unknown traveler, I believe is English, made this sketchbook. A magnificent record of what the country looked like in 1874-75. And one of the most remarkable images in here, the equivalent of Airbnb in 1874, somewhere on the way to Nemea, they stopped at an inn, and here you see their riding gear, their weapons, they've got the fire going, cook some dinner, try to dry out before the next day's travel. January the 13th. No wonder he's sitting so close to the fire. And this is the sort of record that can help us to visualize the world as it was at a time that's now, of course, gone. John Gennadius, whose collection made up the core of the Gennadius Library and whose benefaction made it all possible, this is what he envisioned. But I will also benefit by seeing all of these going back home, back where it began its life and where it can join others and be studied by scholars who will be able to tell me much more about its travels through time.
The Gennadius Library is a place that is full with books that have a very special history because they've spoken to somebody who had the passion, the will, and the eagerness to look for something. They were chosen by a collector. There are genius collectors. Gennadius was one of them. He was looking for something very specific. And I think this is what makes a good collector, to know what you're looking for. In the case of our library, the word is Greece, Greek, Athens, Constantinople, Byzantium, or something of the sort. This is the foundation upon which Other collectors have offered their personal collections, the heirlooms of their parents, of their grandparents. And of course, new materials come in because people want to find a good home.
What Curtis Runnels has been collecting fit very much to what both the Archives of the American School and the Gennadius Library have been collecting so far. Documents that are related to the history of archaeology in Greece, to the history of the Greek nation. It's very important when the collector decides to donate to an institution with organized facilities. It's not only that we will provide safe storage for posterity.
All these precious items get a new life. They get energized because here they also are shared with the public. It finds a new home, a home that is open to all.
Ladies and gentlemen, Curtis Runnels. Let's join us back here. Every time I watch that film, it's that last scroll. Here, have a seat with us. We're going to put you back in the Inquisition. Every time I watch that, it's that last scrolling through of all those titles to see the depth and magnitude of what you've collected. And I didn't tell you this, when we played that on at the virtual gala we had a couple years ago, we played this thing and we got a bunch of emails, and one of them was actually a phone call. A lady called me up, I didn't know her, and she said to me her daughter was 8 years old and watched that film, and the next day when she was playing, she went into her playroom and she was searching through her books, and she took out a Dr. Seuss book and she smelled it and she looked at it. And she brought it to her mom, and she goes, "Look, I'm Curtis Runnels."
Smelling the book.
Yeah, exactly. So you change people's lives. So I'm going to start off, and I hope you can think. We're going to open this up for some questions and answers, but I'm just going to say, I look at you, Curtis, and I didn't know Ioannis Gennadius. I get to know you better, but I see his spirit living within you, and. The first question I asked you before, but I want these people to hear. You're a professor at BU. You've spent your life finding these wonderful manuscripts. You've selected these children, right? These books and these things. Why did you donate it to the Gennadius Library?
Well, I couldn't think of anything else that I would want to do. I also, like Ioannis Gennadius, we have no children. I look at the books, where are they to go? And I've always followed in Gennadius's footsteps. I mean, I admired him. I read his works. He wrote a number of very interesting things, not just about book collecting. So he's somebody who I admired, and having used the library, how many times had some book been brought to my reading table, and there was his notes in it and his name, and I thought about that gift and how he made it possible for me to see and read these things. So somehow not like I woke up in one morning and a light bulb went off and I said, ooh, I'll send these to the Gennadius. I just have a feeling they were always intended to be there. Many of them started life in Greece, so it's kind of obvious as you go back. But also, let's face it, the Gennadius Library is probably one of the most important libraries in the world, precisely because it is the repository for everything about Greece and Hellenism in its broadest sense. And there is no other repository like it. And in fact, I've been particularly eager to spread this gospel amongst booksellers and librarians and bibliophiles, some of whom already know about the Gennadius, some are only learning about it. And as its profile has been, through your leadership, has been growing and expanding, more and more people are going, this is astonishing. Astonishing because it was done right from the beginning, you know, with Gennadius's heartfelt collection. And let's face it, he was also lucky to be collecting at the time he was collecting.
Talk about that. Why is that?
Well, nobody else wanted the books at those days. And so even though he was a man of, I mean, he was an ambassador, so he wasn't exactly poor, but he was certainly not a man of great means. And he had to be very careful in the selection of things. But those books, you know, compared to, say, you know, Latin manuscripts, you know, of the West, Greek books were undervalued at the time. Very few people read them. And certainly anything printed that is after the manuscript tradition, when they began to print books, particularly things in modern Greek, very few people had any interest. So they were basically inexpensive. This has changed. Now there have been many major collectors who followed after Gennadius, and now pickings are much slimmer. But he was just in the right place. It was the 1880s and 90s. There were still, there was now, you know, with telegraphy, it was possible to communicate with booksellers all over Europe and in the United States. And everybody came to know that, you know, Ioannis Gennadius would want these books. So he was offered the most fantastic treasures. And he collected them together, and then, loving them as he did, he thought, well, what shall I do with them? And again, I don't think he could think of anything else except to send them to Greece. And it was such a magnificent gesture, and it brought me to a stop when I saw the building for the first time.
Right.
And somehow that seed was planted. So I never woke up and said, oh, I think I've changed my mind. Instead of, I don't know, selling them in some big auction, I'm going to give them to Gennadius. I don't think I ever had another idea.
Well, we thank you, and I think, if I may be so bold, the people of Greece thank you. Certainly the scholars do. I think we should applaud his generosity, and Priscilla Murray, for that matter. Now, you know, one of the most exciting things that I get to do is I get to sit and have lunch with him every so often, and every time we're together, he takes something. Oh, let me show you what I brought today. It's like show and tell. We're in second grade again. But it's much, much better. The only thing that upsets me is I can't bring him to my house for Thanksgiving dinner, because he would be the most amazing guest, you know. But today you brought some show and tell.
Yeah.
So, and, you know, it's not just the book, it's not just the, you know, what we found or what we think it might be. It's actually the story that might go along with it. Should you talk a little bit about it? May I be so bold as to? There we go.
Here, let me take them out of the little pretty bag here. And then everybody will get a chance to see them.
Yeah. After we're done, we're going to have a little table, and we can go there. That's right. We can see.
One of the most amazing things about Curtis, too, I think, is that you must have a very special eye, because you manage to find things that are extraordinary in places, as you say, I mean, in a box, or in places where you wouldn't necessarily expect to find sort of treasures, of Greek treasures. And you know, this is why I'm very excited every
Curtis,
time
if I may, before you start, what was the dumpster story? Remember we were together one time, you said you were in New York City, there was a dumpster, you saw some parchment.
That's a Charles Wesley Bradley archive. The first undergraduate American student to excavate in the Mediterranean on a Greek site. One of the first members of the American School of Classical Studies from Harvard. This is 1881. And while he was digging at Assos, and he spent the winter then in Athens, where, by the way, he became quite friendly with Heinrich Schliemann. He left behind diaries and letters and essays and things like this. And a bookseller in New Haven, Connecticut had this archive, and they said, what can we do with this? And I thought, well, the Gennadius could have it, but it was expensive. So drummed my fingers, so I just bought it and gave it to them. And then I wrote a blog about it in Natalia's blog, and I got an email from somebody who said, I'm the one who found that archive and sold it to the bookseller. And he told the story how he's walking down the street with his wife in Manhattan, and there was a dumpster outside of, I don't know, Fifth Avenue building, and all the dumpster was just filled with books and papers and material. And he saw that material, and he gathered it up, he and his wife, and took some other things. And they came back, and the dumpster was gone, right? So we don't know what went with the dumpster. And that was how literally it was snatched from the jaws of destruction at the last possible instant.
I remember you telling me, he was actually telling me that, and that's one of the things that's very scary because, with somebody passing away and not knowing what's in their collection and not being told and not sharing what's there, you could be losing priceless
I'm afraid
art.
so.
I mean, it's really unbelievable. So to know, to be able to share with, and I've heard stories from our family of people that are inheriting things and they have no concept. So sorry.
I know. I'm afraid that I've walked through the streets of Cambridge right here, and I've seen dumpsters literally piled up with books, 18th and 19th century books. It's terrible, but it's true. So snatching them from the jaws of destruction is part of my job. So these are two books that I'm giving to Maria Iorgopoulou to take to the Gennadius as part of the bequest. We're sending them over gradually by hand, rather than putting them in a crate and risking loss. So here's just an example. This is one that came from that box that was in Toronto. Okay. So the story of this was an old man came in to the bookseller and said that he had this box of books. The bookseller bought them because there were some printed books in it. And he pulled out the printed books, and that was all he wanted. And then he found one, and he opened it up, and he saw it was a manuscript, something like this. And here I'll try to open this to one of the decorated pages so you can see what it looks like in there. And he brought one of these then to the Heinz Convention Center. This was in November of 2001. It was on display like this, and that was the book I bought that I talk about in the film. And then he said, well, there were others in this box. I thought he meant printed books. So when it dawned on me he meant manuscripts, well, then he sent it down and I bought them, and now most of them are already in the library, but this was the last. No, there's one other. It's not very good. Well, you're getting it anyway.
We'll take it anyway.
Yeah. So I've been giving you the best ones, but this one is just typical. It's a lectionary. The watermarks would suggest to me that it's probably 16th century, but it looks really more like 18th or 17th century. I really don't know. It's unresearched. It's got some diagrams in it, like, let's see, I was showing one here. There's one on the other page. It looks like, where is it? Anyway, we'll flip through it on the table over there. It's just an example of a medieval manuscript that was being in use. I eventually figured out that most of them probably had been, at least at some point, on the island of Chios. And somehow, because they have colophons in them, and they ended up somehow in Toronto, who knows when. The books were, various printed things. But this other one, now this is not from that. This is from London. I bought this from Sam Fogg, who's a manuscript dealer back 25 years ago. And very tiny, very unprepossessing, but what immediately grabbed my attention when I opened it is there is a leaf with handwriting on it that says, an ancient Greek manuscript found in a convent on Mount Athos.
Wait, a convent on Mount Athos?
Well, that's what they called it in those days. The handwriting is from, the handwriting is from 1790, something like that. It's 18th century. And you know, I was immediately interested because there weren't very many people who were on Mount Athos in the 18th and 19th century collecting books. So there's several people who might have collected this little volume. And it's in a binding from the early 19th century that has Italian titles. Now, Lord Elgin's secretary, William Hamilton, went on a book buying trip in Athos and is said to have left some of the books in Italy. So it could be from him, but I found several other people who might be of interest. Meanwhile, it's hard to date it again. There are 4 different people wrote in it. And they're called hands, different hands that are written in them. A few are signed. One's dated 1678. But the watermarks suggest that the book actually started life earlier, probably in the 15th century. And the most exciting thing in this one, which I have marked here in a piece of paper, is not visual, but content. This leaf here contains an account of the fall of Constantinople, which I believe is on the watermarked paper, so it may be a contemporary account. And so far as I know, unpublished. So here's a book that started off life on Mount Athos. Which monastery, we don't know. Found its way to Italy, eventually to London, then to Boston, and now it's going to go back to Athens.
Thank you very much.
You should go to the Holy Mountain, but
thank you very much.
But Athens.
I'm not going to allow this. I'm sorry.
So thank you very much. So I'm going to open at this point. We're at 7:58, but I do we have one more surprise, one more thing at the end. But any questions from our audience? We'd love. Yes, George.
What kind of facility have you been able to hold these in the interim? I assume all these are very sensitive temperature, humidity, etc. And short of you living in a vacuumed home.
No. Well, even the Gennadius library wasn't in such a circumstance. No, these books have been through thick and thin. I am not a white glove type person. So nope, they're just on the shelves, and they have been read and loved, and I intend for them to continue to be read and loved.
Second question.
Read and loved, except when he gave it to me, and we hand deliver back to Princeton. I drive like 30 miles an hour on Mass Pike, because I'm like, the car isn't worth the books.
Second question I have is that once you began to contribute these books to the Gennadio, what happened to your own interest in continuing to acquire? In other words, did you shift into a different...
Very simple. When Ioannis Gennadius gave his collection, Maria mentioned that there were some 33,000 volumes, but when he actually gave the collection, it was 26,000 volumes. So he continued to collect, and he would get them in his home, he and Florence in the house, and then after he had them for a while, he packed them up, and a regular set of boxes kept showing up at the Gennadius. So even in the last few weeks, I've made a few purchases. So even as they are slowly going in 2s and 3s and 5s and 6s, and your friend came and collected a bag when you needed it for the exhibit.
Yes.
So even as the shelves slowly empty, that leaves tempting holes.
So you're incorrigible. Okay, so the last question is there a particular area, type of book, type of printed material that you focused on, or not necessarily?
Well, no. I have several collections. Actually, the Greek collection is only one. I have collections also in a Western Americana, collections in the history of archaeology. There's several others. I have a list somewhere so I can remember.
One on garden gnomes. No, I'm kidding.
So basically, I am idiorhythmic. In other words, when I see something and if I love it, I've got a beautiful little Greek New Testament, for instance. I bought in Hay-on Wye in Wales, 17th century, with a beautiful silver clasp binding, for no other reason than the binding simply made me fall in love. And the diarist Samuel Pepys once said the same thing. He bought a little book in Amsterdam. He said, "For the love of the binding." It's hard to describe, but sometimes it's just that is enough.
But Gennadius was doing the same thing.
Yes.
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 There are books that are there for their binding.
Just for the binding, and frankly, sometimes the smell. I bought a beautiful book recently that the owner must have had a house filled with sandalwood incense. Because when you open the book, it's just like, it's an incredible thing. And when I was looking through the Athos book, you could smell the Musco Libano, right? I mean, it's absolutely redolent, right? You could see the wax, you know, from the candles, you know, the thumbprints from, you know, where they turned it over.
You know, you mentioned, you know, Curtis and Priscilla, out of their own love, have purchased these books. Well, in honoring Curtis in 2021, was it? 2021, the Gennadius Library Overseers actually tried to help him along the way. So we established the Curtis Runnels Acquisition Fund at the Gennadius Library, which certainly doesn't match their love and passion, but it enabled other people to join him on the journey and give a little support to go find
So
things.
Maria can dip in there. And,
dip in there and buy stuff.
But there is more, because in fact, I mean, Curtis, really we consult with him when we want to buy something, or if he sees something in auction that we ought to buy. I mean, so we are in, it's wonderful to be in this sort of respect to talk to you and learn from you.
And that was one of the benefits of the Potamianos lecture series, because we had people that stood up, wanted to get engaged, and they started participating in this actively and saying, you know what, we want to be a book hunter too. We just don't know what to look for. So here, take a little bit of that. Other questions, Jim, Dr. Scott?
I have a couple questions about Gennadius, the man. I'm wondering if
They're online. They're online. They want to hear.
Was his library courted by anybody else? And why Gennadius? I mean, why American School of Classical Studies and not University of Athens?
Gennadius wanted to give his books to Greece. I mean, that is very clear. In the early 20th century, he gave 3,000 engravings to the National Library of Greece. His dad had been part of the committee that opened the National Library and founded the National Library. But unfortunately, when he came back a few years later, they couldn't find the engravings. And I think that really made him to be very suspicious. Gennadius never lived in Greece anyway. As a parenthesis, the engravings are there, but they were catalogued about 100 years too late, which is very unfortunate. And as you all know, I mean, in a library, if you don't know what you have, if you don't have a catalog, if you don't have a trace of what you have, it's as if the books are missing. So the other thing is that Gennadius wanted to have a building made for his library. This meant money. And in the 1920s, there were not too many other players, not in Europe, who could do that. So it was a very fortunate event, because he was in Washington, D.C., and there he met with Edward Capps, who was part of the American School. So somehow this sort of came together, this agreement came together very easily, it seems.
It's sort of a follow-up, but you mentioned his travel to Washington, D.C. Does the collection today have any either manuscript texts, letters, or even early books on Greek American history?
Gennadius, in addition to his books, he has 116 scrapbooks. And in these scrapbooks, he has all sorts of things. So he came to the U.S. in the 1890s, and there's a whole scrapbook that has to do about the United States. He was not particularly interested, and I don't know what there was for Greek America at the beginning of the 20th century. I don't know that he had a very particular interest. But we certainly do. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's part, and when last year, or 2021, we had an exhibition on American Philhellenism about the Greek War of Independence. And I was a bit hesitant to put together the exhibition because I thought we didn't have enough material. And I think, Curtis, who was on the board of overseers, said, "Oh, I think I have things for you." And in fact, there were newspapers and there were wonderful things. It's quite interesting that sometimes maybe the material is there, but you need to look for it. And sometimes it's the angle that you look for or through which you look at the material.
And it's been hard to collect that material here. Boston's been the best place. I've picked up some of the rarest material that's yet to come. I've picked up in this area because it was a center of interest, both of Philhellenes, right, American Philhellenes, but also of the Greek American community. But that stuff is hard to find. Booksellers, if they even get it, they don't necessarily think it's important enough to list it.
Yeah.
It's difficult to, so most of it I've encountered by complete accident.
Like the 3 letters, of Tsiklitis that...
Some of them just, a bookseller just sent them to me in the mail.
These letters?
Yeah. He just said, "Oh, you might be interested in this. I have no idea what they're about."
And this is the first Greek ship that arrived in Boston. And, the Greek scholars from Harvard, went to meet a Greek person because they wanted to figure out how he spoke, about pronunciation. It's extraordinary.
The first time they heard modern Greek being spoken in Boston, 1814. And I had a letter from the man, and some other documents. They just came in the mail. This guy, I don't know where he got them. Right? He's died since, and he just sent them in the mail. And I opened it up, I thought, this is, astounding. What else is still in attics and, trunks and things like that? So I haven't given up, right? And if I see those things, I pounce.
Well, that's a take-home for today for people watching online. Go upstairs to your attics and look through it. Don't throw things out. Rummage, and remember to save that. You're talking about the mail, just as an aside. We got in the car. I picked up Curtis to come over here, and I said, "Hey, Curtis, what's new?" And I said, "Actually, for you, I should say what's old, because of the books, But he was telling the story as we were driving here from Needham about, unfortunately, the way you share this stuff, right? And you have, what DHL, something said something, and all of a sudden, like, "Oh, sorry, we lost it." Yeah. He's like, "But we'll pay your insurance." "I don't want your insurance. I want the book." Yeah. So. And any other questions from the audience tonight? We have one final piece, and then we'll close. The one final piece was requested for us to share with you tonight. It was a special moment in our honoring of Curtis Runnels. We played something that actually brings this all together and brings it back home. And you'll hear, I actually introduce it. As an aside, I made sure not to wear the same tie or suit that I have in the film. But it has to do with someone that was very near and dear to the Hellenic College and Holy Cross community, the connection between Curtis Runnels and perhaps with many in certainly the Hellenic College and Holy Cross community. So let's just take a quick moment to see this moment that surprised Curtis, actually. He didn't know it was coming. Thank you, Curtis, and congratulations. Tonight, as we celebrate you, we wanted to do something special. I remembered when we had met. You had shared with me that you collect things sometimes without knowing precisely what they are. And when you gift them back to the Gennadius library, you do so knowing that others might come in with more knowledge on a certain subject matter and study the items and talk about them. Well, as it turns out, I myself was at the Gennadius library and asked about your collection. And I was amazed to see that you actually located rare handwritten Byzantine music manuscripts. Now, for those that aren't aware, Byzantine music is liturgical music written for the Orthodox worship. The notation itself is much different than Western music, and actually to be able to read and chant it, you really need to spend years studying. How do I know this? Because I'm a chanter myself, and I could not believe my eyes when I saw what you found. And as I stood there in the Gennadius, looking at this manuscript, I thought to myself, who is the last person that had this book in their hands? Who did it belong to? And then I thought, And who's the last person to actually look at it and know how to read it and bring it to life? And then I thought to myself, Curtis, you may have found and purchased these books and donated them to the library, but I bet you had no idea what this sounded like. So tonight, to honor you this evening, we have decided to bring one of the books you discovered to life. To make this possible, it's my pleasure now to introduce from the Gennadius Library, Arkon Protopsaltis, and my professor of Byzantine music, Fotis Kezedzis. Share that with you tonight. We're honored to have Curtis, Runnels, and Maria with us. We want to just say in conclusion that we thank you for joining us this evening. We thank President Cantonis, Presidenta Chrysula, and Markela Patitsis for their hospitality, and we're honored. We ask that just the following, if you enjoyed this evening, you have the American School of Classical Studies at Athens lectures and events that are happening online. We think that is truly an amazing opportunity, and we encourage you to watch some of these things. There's a program in the back. You can be a friend of the Gennadius too to stay in touch with us. Look for the Patamianos lecture series when it's here as well. But we also want to extend, we usually do this in the beginning, but we want to extend a warm welcome to the Consul General. We're sorry that you came towards the back end, but we're honored by your presence tonight. Oh, no, please. It was such, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all. And a round of applause again for Curtis and Maria. We're going to have the books that you can actually, oh, yes. We can have the books, actually. We're going to show the manuscripts, obviously no touching and no eating around them. But Maria has something she wants to offer. Go ahead. You see it. Oh, I see it.
Yes, I think I do have a mic. Can I have the presbytera here, maybe? I mean, I wanted to offer something for your hospitality. And this is the catalog of an exhibition that opened on Thursday, on the 20th, I think, yeah, the 20th. And it's our exhibition on 1922, based from the archives of the American School, based on the literary archives of Venesis, Mirivilis, Theotokos, and Seferis. So we would like very much for you to have.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
Mike, here you go. Sorry.
No, George.
Thanks.
First off, thank you all for coming. Maria, Curtis, it was fascinating. I really still would like to visit your storage facility for this. George, thank you. I call the house, yes. I don't know how many stories or how many square feet, but Presbytera Chrysula, thank you for the time and the commitment that it took to go ahead and arrange with Gennadius people all of the work that needed to be done in putting all this together. Markella and the team, thank you all very much. Mr. Tigos, always good to see you. Have a good evening, and thank you all for joining us.